Hey there Star Wars fans, and welcome back to Astromech Productions, a Star Wars and LEGO Star Wars YouTube channel. In today's episode, I'm going over the world between worlds. This is probably one of the most mysterious things in the Star Wars universe, because we don't actually really know what it is. But I'm going to do my best to give an overview of all that we do know about it in canon, and then I'm going to try and explain time travel in Star Wars, or rather what I think time travel in Star Wars is, because again, we don't really know. So let's get into it. So, the world between worlds, or the Vergent Scatter, is a Force Nexus plane. It's purely created by, and was a focal point of, the Force, very similar to Mortis. It was essentially a place outside of time and space that was a collection of portals between places in the galaxy that allowed you to travel anywhere in any time period of the galaxy. Now, it's not exactly known if it links all places in the Star Wars galaxy or not, but I think we can be fairly sure that's not the case, as then it would have to be ridiculously huge. So I think we can guess that the Force showed significant events and places in a person/persons who are theirs life. The world between worlds was first theorized as the Chain Worlds theorem in the ancient Jedi texts stored on the island of Arc 2. The only time we've seen the world between worlds in Star Wars is in the TV show Star Wars Rebels. As far as we know, it was only accessible through the Jedi Temple on the planet of Lothal. An ancient painting of the Mortis wands was on the wall, which, when touched by a Force user, produced paintings of Loth wolves, which would run across the wall and begin to run in a circle, forming a portal to the world between worlds. Ezra Bridger was the first person, to our knowledge, to enter the world between worlds in 0BBY, where he pulled Ahsoka Tano into it from her duel with Darth Vader. Then, through Sith sorcery, Darth Sidious made a second portal, which he used to attack and attempt to capture the pair, using blue force fire, though whether he was actually able to enter the world between worlds through that portal, we don't know. So that's basically everything we know about the world between worlds in Star Wars, but obviously one of the most important parts of it is the time travel capabilities. So now I'm going to explain how I think time travel works in Star Wars, based off the small amount of evidence we have. Okay, so there are really three main types of time travel. The first one is what I'm going to call the Avengers Endgame time travel. And this is essentially the time travel theory that there are multiple timeline branches. So as soon as you go back or forward in time, you change the entire timeline you're in and you branch off into a separate timeline. Now, sometimes in movies that utilize this time travel theory, you can jump between the timelines, but generally you just have to stay on one timeline, and that timeline is forever changed. Both timelines exist, so if you there's a timeline that if you had done what you did to change the timeline, and then if you hadn't done what you did, and you can also keep changing the timeline as many times as you need to. There's also second timeline time travel theory that is essentially most famously the Back to the Future time travel theory, which essentially you have one straight timeline, and every time you go back or forward in time, you change the whole timeline. So if you were to go back in time and change something, the entire timeline is then changed. So when you go forward in time, you then go to a different future. And there's no going back really, you can't properly change that. You cannot jump between timelines, there's one straight timeline and the whole thing stays the same. The third type of time travel is the either Terminator or Harry Potter time travel. I'm just going to call it the Harry Potter time travel, which is if you change something in time, that always happened, so nothing has changed. So if you were to go back in time and change something, nothing then changes in your present because you always change that thing. Therefore, your present is then determined by you changing that thing in your current present going to the past. I think a simpler way of explaining it is in terms of kind of base shapes. So the endgame time travel theory is a bit like a tree. You have one main timeline and then that can branch off into several things, and it's going forward, it's sort of linear. You have the Back to the Future time travel, which is one straight line. It's linear, and let's say the line is originally white, and then you may change something, and then like a blue line comes in, and then that might carry on for a bit, and then you change something again, so then a red line comes in, and it may be different time things from the original, but it's still all in one timeline. In that endgame tree timeline, you have all kind of, the blue line and the white line and the red line and the yellow line, for example, all existing at the same time. Now, for Harry Potter time travel, it's not a line, it's not linear. In that, time is sort of viewed like a sphere. Everything happens at the same time and is determined by one another. So you can't change one bit and it comes out and is different because it's all the same. So you just have a one white sphere. It's all the same and it all sort of happens at the same time because you can't change what you did because you already changed it, if that makes sense. So what I think, and what the kind of the general theory for Star Wars is that it follows the Harry Potter time travel theory, the sphere time travel theory, that you go back in time and change it, but nothing in your present changes because you always went back in time and changed it. So essentially the main theory of proof for that is the Ahsoka being pulled into Ezra's main timeline. Now, I think the main bit of proof from that is that at the end of the original episode where we thought Ahsoka may have died, we see Ahsoka then walking back into the temple. And also, we don't actually see Ahsoka dying. So to our knowledge, Ahsoka may never have died, we don't know, but Ezra pulled her out. And if Ezra had always done that, she then went back in, and we were able to have that shot of her walking into the temple. The advantage of that one, this Harry Potter theory, is that it's much simpler to follow in that it doesn't disobey base time travel laws like the grandfather paradox. And the grandfather paradox essentially states that, say you were to go back in time and kill your grandfather can then not have, say, your mother, and your mother is then not alive to kill you. So you were then never alive to go back and kill your grandfather. So your grandfather survived, had your mother, who had you, who then went back in time and killed your grandfather, etc., etc. You can't solve it, which is why it's a paradox. And I think as soon as you start bringing paradox into it, everything gets a bit more confusing, which is why the Harry Potter one sort of makes the most sense. And I think that's, if they were to continue using time travel in Star Wars, that's the sort of one they need, because then you don't have kind of lots of time travels everywhere and it gets confusing like it has sort of done with the Avengers timeline, where you've got all these timelines all over the place and it gets a bit confusing about what's going on, and you avoid complicated paradoxes like the grandfather paradox and everything is the same and you kind of know what's going on. Now, I believe Dave Filoni has said that he's not going to use the world between worlds again, or someone has said that they're not really going to use the world between worlds much anymore, simply because, you know, bringing time travel into Star Wars in general can just get a bit confusing. And also it's one of those kind of mysteries that's best left unsolved, kind of like Yoda species, you know, we don't really have to know. So I think that's the kind of, the time travel in Star Wars, I believe, works in that sort of spherical Harry Potter-esque way. We don't have proper evidence. It hasn't been kind of canonic, canon said in canon, but I think that's the way that it works, and if they were to use it again, it should work. Okay guys, so which time travel theory do you think is correct for the Star Wars universe, and also would you guys like to see the world between worlds again? If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and make sure you subscribe and turn your post notification bells on. May the force be with you, and I'll see you next time on Astromech Productions.